She thought she could flip a switch and end my life. What she didn't know? I owned the entire switchboard. That was the moment the story stopped being about a petty neighbor and started becoming something much larger, a struggle over control, dignity, and the quiet power hidden in plain sight. Karen came marching down the sidewalk with the authority of a monarch, chin lifted, clipboard clutched in one hand as though it were a sword. Behind her, a couple of board members trailed nervously, glancing around at the gathering crowd. She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "If you won't comply with our rules, then we'll cut the current right here, right now. Let's see how smug you look in the dark." The words hit like thunder. Lights flickered across porches, neighbors peeked out from curtains, children whispered at the edges of the lawn. Power wasn't just electricity, it was safety, food in the fridge, warmth on cold nights, the hum of life itself. And she was threatening to strip it away, not just from me, but from the entire block, if that's what it took to make her point. I watched her with steady eyes, refusing to give her the satisfaction of panic. She thrived on rattling people, on watching dignity unravel. But silence unnerved her more than shouting. She kept gesturing toward the breaker box at the corner of the street, whipping up drama like an actress in the final act of a tragedy. "One pull," she warned, "and it's all over." Neighbors muttered. Some begged her to calm down, others secretly thrilled at the chaos. Phones came out, red lights blinking as cameras rolled. It was no longer a private HOA scuffle. It was a stage, and Karen was desperate to play the lead. What she didn't realize was that the script had already been written, and the twist was waiting for its cue. She thought this was about intimidation, about silencing me with the flick of her wrist. But what happened next left the entire neighborhood speechless, because the moment she reached for that breaker, the story of power, who held it, who controlled it, was about to be rewritten in a way she never imagined. Power was never just about electricity in our neighborhood. It was about control, and the HOA had made that clear for years. They treated every cable, every fence, every blade of grass as if it were part of their kingdom. Rules weren't written to protect the community. They were crafted to remind people who was in charge. A mailbox painted the wrong shade could earn you a fine. A flag hung the wrong way could trigger a citation. And Karen, with her iron grip and endless appetite for conflict, thrived on it. She believed she owned not only the streets, but the pulse that ran beneath them. To her, the breaker box wasn't just a piece of metal and wires. It was her throne. She strutted around as if she could summon darkness with the snap of her fingers, convinced that people would bow to her authority once the lights went out. The arrogance in her stride told the story. She thought she was the grid itself. Yet everyone knew how fragile life becomes when the current stops flowing. Refrigerators full of food spoiled within hours. Medical equipment in some homes ran on constant electricity. Children's tablets, parents' laptops, heaters, air conditioners, all of them depended on the invisible lifeline humming beneath our feet. Neighbors whispered it to each other. Losing power meant losing security. That's why the crowd watched Karen so closely. Their own comfort was caught in her theatrics. But what made this moment more than a neighborhood spat was the deeper principle at stake. This wasn't merely about whether my porch light stayed on or off. It was about whether one entitled individual could weaponize something essential, something meant for everyone, and bend it to her will. Tyranny doesn't always arrive with uniforms and banners. Sometimes it comes in the form of a clipboard and a smug smile, dressed up as community service. I stood silently, watching the unease ripple through the gathering. Some neighbors were angry at me, worried her tantrum would leave them in the dark. Others clenched their fists, finally seeing how her obsession with rules had crossed into pure menace. Either way, all eyes were on that breaker. Karen relished the tension. She wanted the cameras to capture her as the figure of ultimate authority. "This community runs because of order," she declared. "If one person refuses to obey, we all pay the price." She raised her hand as if preparing to strike a final blow, but control built on arrogance always hides a fatal weakness. She didn't know the truth about what really powered our homes, about who had wired the heart of the system she thought she owned. She had no idea that beneath her grandstanding she was standing on quicksand, and when she actually tried to pull the plug, she unleashed a storm she wasn't ready for. Karen did not become the face of the HOA overnight. She built her reputation brick by brick, conflict by conflict, until people learned that the surest way to ruin a weekend was to cross her path. She relished the title of board president as if it were royalty, not a volunteer position in a neighborhood association. Where others saw a community, she saw a fiefdom. Every driveway, every garden bed, every streetlight was, at least in her mind, under her command. Her story had a pattern, and everyone in the subdivision could recite it. Then came the confrontation. Karen showing up uninvited, arms crossed, voice pitched just loud enough for other neighbors to overhear. Finally, if her target resisted, came the fine. She stacked those fines like trophies, reminders of how easily she could make life miserable. Yet what made Karen infuriating was her staggering hypocrisy. She preached constantly about community standards, but her own yard was a jungle of half-dead shrubs. She railed against neighbors for unsightly clutter, yet her garage overflowed with boxes that spilled onto her driveway. She fined a veteran for flying his flag at an angle she didn't like, all while her own flagpole rusted in plain view. She demanded conformity from everyone else while excusing her every shortcoming. Neighbors joked that she must have memorized the rule book not to follow it, but to weaponize it. And she wielded those rules like daggers, especially against those she thought too quiet to fight back. Families new to the country, young couples buying their first home, older residents who just wanted peace. Those were her favorite targets. She measured her power by how many people she could silence. Still, Karen was not a cartoon villain. She was frightening because she seemed so plausible. There was something in her self-righteous tone, her endless insistence that she was protecting property values, that convinced some people she was right, until they saw her turn on them. By then, it was too late. The fines piled up, the meetings dragged on, and Karen always walked away smirking. Her history was littered with petty wars. She forced a neighbor to repaint his entire house because she claimed the shade of blue clashed with the community aesthetic. She tried to ban children from riding bikes on the sidewalks, insisting it created liability. She even once proposed motion sensors on porch lights so she could find people whose lights stayed on too late. Each battle was absurd, but each one reinforced her belief that she was untouchable. That belief made her dangerous. Karen had convinced herself she could bend reality with paperwork and intimidation. She no longer saw neighbors as equals, but as subjects. Every meeting, every letter, every confrontation added fuel to the fire of her entitlement. By the time she marched toward the breaker box, she wasn't just playing HOA president anymore. She believed she was judge, jury, and executioner of the entire community. But arrogance always blinds. Karen had built her throne on contradictions, ignoring the fact that her crown was made of paper. She could bully people about fence height and mailbox paint, but she didn't know the first thing about the infrastructure that kept the neighborhood alive. And this time, she picked the wrong fight, because she didn't know who really owned the wires under her feet. I never asked for a fight with the HOA. I bought my home because I wanted peace. Quiet mornings with my coffee, evenings with my family, the kind of life that felt stable after years of moving from place to place. To me, the house wasn't just property. It was the first real anchor I had ever planted in American soil. Every nail I hammered, every dollar I poured into it carried the weight of sacrifice. I had worked long hours, taken jobs others turned down, and endured the sting of being told I didn't belong, yet here I was, standing proud on land I had earned. Neighbors often said I had a calmness about me that I didn't rattle easily. It wasn't a gift, but something I'd learned. Years earlier, I had worked with utility companies, part of teams that kept entire districts connected through storms, outages, and disasters. Electricity wasn't just wires to me. It was lifeblood. I had seen how a single line could mean the difference between panic and survival. I'd also seen how fragile it was, how a system built with arrogance could collapse in a heartbeat. That experience shaped me. It taught me that true power was never in the loudest voice. It was in preparation, in knowledge, in patience. When I bought my house, the subdivision was still growing. I was there the day they laid the conduit, the day the grid was connected. I signed paperwork most homeowners never see, dealt with contractors, and even inspected the lines myself. It was just part of who I was, making sure things worked, ensuring my family wouldn't be left in the dark. No one else noticed, no one else cared. But I knew that one day those details might matter. So when the HOA turned their eyes on me, I didn't crumble. Karen tried the usual tricks. Letters filled my mailbox accusing me of violating obscure rules. One week it was my hedges, the next it was the paint trim on my porch. Neighbors apologized on her behalf, told me to just ignore her, but I knew how bullies operated. Ignoring them never stopped them. What did stop them was quiet resolve, the kind that couldn't be shaken by noise. My family watched me absorb each blow with dignity. When Karen shouted at meetings, I answered with measured words. When she scribbled fines, I appealed with paperwork more thorough than hers. My children asked why I never yelled back. I told them, because if I lose my temper, I give her the power she thinks she has. That was the lesson I wanted them to carry. That calm is not weakness, but strength sharpened by patience. Behind that calm, though, was preparation. I knew the system better than she ever could. I knew which lines carried current, which switches mattered, and which ones were just for show. It wasn't arrogance, it was simply knowledge gained from years of work. And that knowledge sat like a secret shield, waiting for the day someone tried to use power as a weapon against me. That day finally came when Karen stormed toward the breaker box, certain she could silence me with a single motion. Neighbors braced for disaster, phones recording, whispers racing through the crowd. But while everyone else trembled, I didn't. Because I knew something Karen never imagined. Which is why when she tried to shut me off, I didn't panic. I smiled. Karen stood tall in front of the crowd, savoring every second of attention. Her voice carried with the sharp edge of a gavel striking wood. Since this homeowner refuses to comply with the rules, I'm authorizing a power cut, effective immediately. She said it like a decree from a throne, her words bouncing off the pavement as if the asphalt itself belonged to her. A ripple went through the neighbors gathered around. Some gasped, others muttered nervously, unsure if she could even do such a thing. A few, the ones who had suffered her fines before, smirked bitterly. This was classic Karen, loud threats designed to humiliate someone in public. She wanted the spectacle, the performance, the cameras. I didn't rise to her bait. I kept my stance relaxed, hands loose at my sides, my expression unreadable. Years of experience had taught me that silence unsettled people like Karen more than arguments ever could. She thrived on confrontation, needed her opponents to shout back so she could point to them as the problem. Instead, I gave her nothing, just calm eyes that watched her unravel. "Don't think your stubbornness makes you special," she barked, pacing like a prosecutor before a jury. "This association has rules. Rules are what keep neighborhoods strong. Without them, chaos takes over. Do you want to be responsible for dragging all of us into the dark ages?" Her words were heavy with self-importance, but her tone betrayed the truth. She was putting on a show. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Parents hugged their children closer. One man whispered about losing everything in his fridge. A woman asked if she should call the police. Karen's theatrics were working. Fear was spreading. She smirked, convinced she had the whole neighborhood in the palm of her hand. I finally spoke. my voice even, controlled, carrying without strain. Karen, power isn't a toy. It's not yours to use as leverage. You don't understand what you're playing with. That only fueled her. I understand perfectly, she snapped back. I understand that rules mean nothing if they're not enforced. I understand that people like you think you're above accountability. Well, not on my watch. Not while I'm in charge. Her finger pointed toward the breaker box, as though it were a guillotine waiting for her command. This is what happens when you defy the board. This is what happens when you disrespect authority. I tilted my head slightly, letting her words hang in the air. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked, not as a plea, but as a warning. Karen mistook it for fear. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin higher. Oh, I'm more than sure. In fact, I'll enjoy proving to everyone here that I have the power to shut you down. The crowd leaned in, breaths caught, phones steady in their hands to capture the climax. And then Karen did what she had promised. She grabbed the lever, her face glowing with smug triumph. The moment she flipped that breaker, the entire neighborhood gasped. The lever slammed down with a metallic snap, and Karen turned toward the crowd with a grin of pure triumph. She spread her arms wide, already rehearsing the victory speech forming on her lips. "Ladies and gentlemen, order restored," she declared. "This is what accountability looks like." But then, something curious happened. Nothing. The porch lights across the street continued to glow. The hum of air conditioners still filled the night. Inside the houses, ceiling fans spun lazily, televisions flickered, refrigerators buzzed. The current hadn't faltered for even a heartbeat. A stunned silence washed over the gathering. People blinked, uncertain, glancing from their glowing windows back to Karen. Someone whispered, "Wait, why is my lamp still on?" Another neighbor tapped his phone screen, shook it, and frowned. "Wi-Fi's fine. Power's still here." Karen's smile wavered. She yanked the lever back up, then shoved it down again with a theatrical flourish. Still nothing. Lights stayed steady, humming in quiet defiance of her authority. Murmurs grew into chuckles, chuckles into outright laughter. The crowd, once cowed by her threats, now began to shift against her. I stepped forward at last, calm as ever. My voice was level, but every syllable carried weight. "Karen," I said, "you just pulled a dummy switch. That box hasn't controlled the grid for years." I paused, letting the truth sink in. The real line, the one that keeps this entire neighborhood alive, belongs to me. Gasps rippled through the group like a wave. Eyes widened. Phones zoomed in, capturing her confusion as her mask cracked in real time. Karen sputtered, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the useless lever. That's not possible. I'm in charge here. The board controls everything." I shook my head, almost pitying her. "You control paperwork. You control fines. But the wires under your feet? The current flowing through every one of these homes? That was my work, my signature, my connection. You've never had the power you thought you did." The laughter swelled now, neighbors covering their mouths, unable to hold back their delight at watching the self-proclaimed queen stripped of her crown. A teenager shouted, "She doesn't even know her own switch." Someone else added, "Guess the lights are smarter than the HOA." The atmosphere flipped from fear to celebration in seconds. Karen's face flushed crimson. She stammered, her words tangled, trying to summon authority that no longer obeyed her. This is fraud. This is sabotage. You can't—" Her voice cracked, swallowed by the roar of amused neighbors who were, for the first time, unafraid to laugh at her. Her shoulders slumped, the clipboard at her side useless now, her power crumbling with every second of silence that followed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken louder than any threat she could conjure. And as the cameras caught her unraveling, the crowd buzzing with disbelief and delight, one thought lingered in the air like static before a storm. Her humiliation had only just begun. But the real humiliation was still to come. The neighborhood didn't go back to normal that night. It erupted. Laughter lingered long after Karen retreated, red-faced and trembling, and within hours the scene spread beyond our block. Phones had captured every second, her dramatic speech, her smug flip of the lever, and the lights stubbornly glowing in defiance. By morning, the clips were circulating online with captions that cut sharper than any fine she had ever written. Karen got fried by her own breaker stunt, one meme declared, paired with an image of her frozen in disbelief. Another video looped the moment she yanked the lever twice with the words, "Still no power, still no clue," flashing across the screen. The internet had no mercy. Hashtags trended locally, and even strangers from outside the community piled on, laughing at the spectacle of a self-appointed tyrant exposed as powerless. Inside the HOA, chaos replaced order. Board members scrambled to distance themselves from her, insisting they had never supported such reckless behavior. Meetings that once echoed with her booming voice now rang with awkward silence, as no one wanted to sit beside her. The authority she had wielded so arrogantly crumbled overnight, reduced to a punchline whispered in grocery store aisles and school pickup lines. For the neighbors who had lived under her constant scrutiny, the shift was liberating. They no longer lowered their voices when passing her house. They no longer fretted about citations for flower pots or flags. Instead, they greeted one another with knowing smiles, united by the memory of Karen's unraveling. And me? For years I had endured her antics with steady patience, never raising my voice, never surrendering my dignity. That patience had paid off. In the eyes of the community, I wasn't just the man she failed to silence. I became the man who revealed that her power was an illusion all along. People who once avoided my driveway now stopped to shake my hand, some whispering their thanks, others laughing about the night the lights stayed on. Respect had replaced suspicion, and admiration quietly followed. But the most powerful part of this story isn't about electricity at all. When the noise of laughter and gossip finally settled, what lingered wasn't just the memory of Karen's humiliation, it was the clarity of what the moment truly meant. This was never about a breaker box, never about one woman's tantrum. It was about how dignity, preparation, and truth can quietly dismantle arrogance without ever raising a fist or a shout. For too long, people believed Karen's authority was unshakable because she barked the loudest. But noise is not strength. Real strength is the calm that refuses to bend, the patience that endures ridicule until the right moment arrives. She wanted to rule with fear. I chose to answer with knowledge. And when fear met truth, it crumbled instantly. That's the lesson every neighbor carried home that night. You don't have to match a bully's rage to defeat them. You don't have to scream louder or become cruel just to survive cruelty. Dignity itself can be a weapon, quiet, steady, impossible to counterfeit. Karen's downfall was not in the lever she pulled, but in the blindness that arrogance always brings. She thought power was in her hands. She never realized it had already slipped away. And in that revelation lies something universal. We all face our own Karens, whether they sit on a board, a committee, or simply try to dictate how others should live. They thrive when people tremble. They collapse when people stand tall. The crowd didn't cheer because the lights stayed on. They cheered because they saw arrogance meet its limit and dignity refuse to move. To anyone watching, anywhere, the takeaway is simple. Sometimes the strongest power is the one they never knew you had. Not the switch in their hand, but the knowledge you carry. Not the threat they hurl, but the calm you hold. That's what turns the tide. That's what writes the ending. And so, in the glow of lights that never dimmed, the story closed not with anger, but with affirmation. That dignity, even in silence, will always defeat hate. She tried to shut me down, but forgot who owns the grid. That night will always be remembered not just for the switch that failed, but for the lesson it revealed. That arrogance collapses when it collides with truth, and that dignity holds more current than any breaker box ever could. Karen believed she could strip me of light, silence my home, and prove herself untouchable. Instead, she exposed her own emptiness, while the neighborhood discovered something far greater: that justice doesn't roar, it stands. That preparation and calm can outlast intimidation, and that no matter how loudly someone threatens, the truth always hums louder in the end. This isn't only my story. It belongs to anyone who has faced a bully, anyone who has been told to bow their head, anyone who has wondered if dignity still has a place in the world. Let this be proof. Dignity wins. Justice wins. Truth always wins. If you believe in that message, if you've felt that surge of pride when arrogance falls and integrity rises, join this movement. Like this story, share it, subscribe, and be part of a community that refuses to live in the dark. The lights are ours, always.